Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, we have just a little bit of rain going on outside the window still, actually coming down rather hard today, but aside from that, let's get right into things. I was watching a documentary last night that was kind of just about sort of serial murderers in the United Kingdom, and it was talking a lot about one named Joanna Dennehy, one that I had never heard of before. But the thing is, though, it was one of those things where they cover multiple cases within one documentary, and I thought it would have been a much better presentation if they had just kind of focused in on one of the specific examples. They also brought up one of the cases we'd mentioned previously on this channel, the case of Rose West. But when you're going to do something about sort of female killers or something like that, Rose West was heavily influenced by her husband, Fred West. He was kind of the driving force in that one, so I kind of took some kind of exceptions to say about that. But it got me thinking again about what we've talked about with serial killers, and just the concept of murder, antisocial behavior, psychopathic behavior, all of those things. Now, when we did the upload on John Hughes on this channel, the serial killer John Hughes, we talked about something that I can't even call it a hypothesis or a theory. It's kind of just something that I'm curious about, and that is the question: will evolution lead to destructive behaviors? Like, will evolution lead to kind of an increase in certain behaviors, such as the antisocial ones that lead to serial killing and mass murdering? And I said this because John Hughes, the killer, said that he always had 100 thoughts going at once, and it was only when he would commit the murder that there was one single thought. And I mentioned the hunter-farmer hypothesis that's kind of described by Thom Hartmann, in the sense that ADD is part of human evolution, where the human brain is evolving to concentrate on multiple things at once. But once again, though, I mean, you're kind of enhancing your predatory instincts. So something that John Hughes said, I think he's an absolutely huge exaggerator if you ever get to watch some of his interviews. I think he really likes to exaggerate himself, but that would be consistent with that narrative. If you have, like, many, many thoughts going at once, but when he would commit a murder, there would only be one single thought, that would actually make some sense, because it's like the threat would be neutralized. He would have the ability to kind of focus in on neutralizing that particular threat. But one of the things that I had been thinking about as well that I didn't mention in that recent upload was, like I said, it's just something that I'd be curious about it. If the human brain really evolves to the point where we're very able to focus on multiple things, and maybe perhaps over the next 150 or 200 years we'd actually get to that point, what would it be like? Would it be like you're able to watch two different movies at the same time, and that you would have, the ability to focus on each one of them as strongly as the average person can focus on one? I mean, would we ever get to something like that? Well, by chance, though, I just happened to watch the movie Rain Man, and he was on one of those YouTube free things. Like, YouTube has that new movies channel where they have the free movies, but you just have to watch the ads with them. And I'd never seen the movie Rain Man before. I mean, even though I'm in my 30s now, it's just something that I had been meaning to do. Bucket list, check there. So I watched that one. Then, of course, I wanted to see some interviews with the real-life Rain Man, Kim Peek. They changed his name for the film, but it's based on an individual named Kim Peek. And, of course, he had an amazing memory, an amazing ability to recall things. And the thing, though, that stood out to me with him is that I had heard about this with him before, that he is neither left-brained nor right-brained. He was someone who just had no filter, and he was just able to absorb information without any it's not going in any direction. He just absorbs everything, and he doesn't forget it. That's how he was able to kind of do the sort of hyper-intense memory abilities that he had. And once again, if you see some interviews with Kim Peek, I think those are fascinating. He had no corpus callosum. Like, in our brain, we have, the two hemispheres, right? Left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And the thing that holds it together is the corpus callosum. But, he didn't have that. He just had one brain, it's just one sort of united mass cortex, and everything just kind of goes into his memory and it doesn't leave. So the thing is, though, I began to wonder, is that actually going to be something that we're going to be kind of evolving to, trying to get to that state? But they did say, though, exactly what I was curious about. Kim Peek, though, the real-life Rain Man, he had the ability to focus on, like, 2 different books at the same amount of time. He could read 2 books at once, the same way that the average person, like me, and perhaps like you too, if you're average. I'm making the kind of assumption that not everyone listening to this is a sort of hyper-powered savant. Like the way the average person would be able to comprehend 1 book, he can comprehend 2 at the same time. And I've also heard of this from other people, like even a friend that I had a few years ago would say that she would do that all the time, just like reading 2 books at the same time, 1 in each hand. And they even said that about the former president, James Garfield, that he could write fluent Greek with 1 hand and fluent Latin with the other hand. He was ambidextrous and multilingual. Is the human brain really evolving to the point where we're going to be experiencing some of those things? I think it's an amazing time to be alive. We're really going to be learning about a whole bunch of new things. And it's not even a hypothesis I can put forward because I'm not a scientist. It's just something I'm curious about. But on the other hand, and this is a very, very big on the other hand, is this going to be turning into something where it's also going to lead to more types of destructive behavior and more types of problematic and far out behavior that is going to be associated with antisocial personalities, and of course leading to people like who would go on to become serial killers and such. When you deal with something like the film Rain Man, of course Dustin Hoffman's character has to be sort of institutionalized. He isn't very fit to live on his own. And of course Kim Peek, the real-life Rain Man, went through some similar things. Although they said, though, that the real-life Rain Man, Kim Peek, was not autistic. He actually just had sort of stunted social development growing up because he was just like kind of didn't really have a lot of social interaction from other people growing up. But that's very interesting to note as well, that he was not autistic. But the thing is, though, are you also going to have people that are going to be going down more of the John Hughes route, where they're going to be kind of using the sort of newfound abilities for destruction? And I mean that in a purely unconscious way. It's not like someone's like, oh, well, now I can concentrate on 2 things at once. I'm going to think about killing people while I'm reading this book. No, not like any sort of conscious or calculated way, but that it's going to be driving more people toward destructive behavior. I mean, some people are probably going to be experiencing a lot of problematic issues. Notice if we say that ADD is consistent with evolution, ADD is treated as what? A disorder, right? It's in the name. So people who are experiencing ADD get put on Ritalin, and it's just treated as something that we kind of need to push down and just get rid of. And it also creates a certain amount of problematic issues when people are trying to learn in the classroom. Well, what about when people are trying to fit into society? I just kind of authored sort of an op-ed piece for one of the local papers or something, talking about some of the material that we've mentioned on this channel recently. Just about the concept of rejection from society is something that needs to be treated as a mental awareness issue. And we can kind of interweave it into our educational system, where we're going to be focusing on kind of giving people some sort of resources and abilities, and just giving them strategies and coaching to deal with the concepts of mental awareness, anger, frustration, but most importantly, rejection from society, and how to go about that. So when we're going to be dealing with some things like the kind of just sort of mental development associated with this, I would definitely expect, if the human brain is evolving to concentrate on different things at once, what happens when someone's going to be feeling rejected from society? Well, and your thoughts are just going to be racing all over the map, and you're just going to be having all sorts of different things going on. It sounds like the way a lot of people kind of describe schizophrenia, to be honest. And I know it's not the exact same thing. I'm fully aware. I mean, some people would instantly be like, comment section, no, you're wrong. No, but in a kind of similar way, if I can kind of make an analogous statement like that. So the thing that I would really kind of be very curious about is, what are we really going to have to anticipate with our educational system? And I definitely think that the educational system is almost going to play a larger role for children than the therapeutic system, because, at least in the United States of America, we have compulsory K through 12 education, and we have to be somewhat aware that almost every person is going to be experiencing mental awareness issues. Once again, not mental illness, mental awareness issues are going to be experienced by nearly every single person in the school system. So the way that we can kind of approach this is we can look at it from just a standpoint of, let's give children and teenagers some of the resources and coaching methods that could be somewhat beneficial. I'd be very curious if we could ever kind of have like an interview with a therapist on this channel to try and discuss some things associated with, mental illness versus mental awareness, as well as the concept of therapy versus life coaching. Because what I would sort of say about that is that, I don't know. I mean, I think for some people, the concept of a life coach is actually what they're looking for as opposed to a therapist. And maybe I'm coming at this from a bit of a slanted angle, but it seems so much of therapy is just, it's your fault, learn to deal with it. And that's just kind of what, like, counseling is really pushing you toward. Whereas when the people... And if you ever get to watch some of the life coach videos on YouTube, I mean, there's a certain sense of optimism that I find with those things that I don't really hear in people talking about therapy, especially when you listen to some channels like Daniel Mackler, when he talks about the reasons why he quit being a therapist because of all the pessimism associated with it. But when you're listening to the life coaching stuff, people are just sort of like, okay, well, what's your problem? And let's find a way to solve that. Whereas the traditional therapeutic model that is practiced by counselors and psychotherapists is recognizing where the problems come from and being honest with yourself. One of the things, though, is, and this is a very, very critical, just highlight this note right here, people who are experiencing psychopathy, antisocial behavior, social problems, they don't necessarily give a flying fuck about that method. And when I was watching that thing about Joanna Dennehy, and they had a few conversations about psychopathy, they almost just took some of the things right out of a previous episode of BBOR when I was like, someone is just going to kind of view a person the same way as they would view a punching bag. Like a psychopath is going to view punching someone in the face the same way they would view punching the speed bag or the hard bag at the gym. They practically said the same thing, just give or take a few words. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, so the person who's the psychopath really isn't looking to get better. And a lot of people kind of experience certain kind of like pleasures and elevations that are associated with causing harm and pain to other people. This is why it's a problem. This is why it blows out of control. And they're really just kind of, it's kind of just something that that can't be satiated exactly. But when we want to talk about this particular concept, I would say though that one of the things that I was very reluctant to admit over the past couple years is that there does seem to be a correlation between testosterone and violent, aggressive behavior. And hey, I'm a guy. I didn't necessarily want to admit something like that, but I guess there has to be some sort of correlation. And that was another thing that we're discussing last night. And I'm like, I really don't like the things that really try to break things down with gender. I mean, I even said on this channel before, there was a channel on YouTube called Female Killers, and the way that they even presented their stuff, I wasn't a fan of it. When they just try to like kind of put the blame game on a particular gender, and no, we don't have to get into Steven Crowder about any sort of third or fourth gender or something like that, but when we're dealing with male and female, they really just like, men and women are trying to put the blame game onto on the other side and such. But one of the kind of things is, though, that you really see, though, with destructive and antisocial behavior, as well as particularly violent behavior, when women are in a position where they believe they are not in any immediate physical danger, supposedly they act just as violent and aggressive as men do. I don't necessarily know if that's true. Once again, I was watching one documentary once where they cited one single study to support that. And as we mentioned on this channel before, one single study is not enough. You need about 30 studies saying the same thing. So it's like, I would say, though, that both men and women are messed up. Both men and women can lead to some destructive behaviors. On average, though, it really does seem like the vast majority of murders are committed by men. And one of the things I was just, like I said, I really didn't want to admit it, that testosterone might be to blame for that, but I don't necessarily know if I can kind of stand by that anymore. I might just be like, all right, fair enough. It seems like there is a definitive correlation between a high testosterone level and kind of destructive behavior. But the thing is, though, women, of course, can have high testosterone levels. That was kind of the subject of last night's film with somebody like Joanna Dennehy from the UK, and perhaps Rose West as well. They were trying to kind of put everyone into this sort of category. But I would definitely say, though, that one of the other points that was mentioned last night was the one of the things there's a part of the brain called the orbital cortex, which is located right above your eye bone. and like right above the brow ridge, sort of. And they're saying that almost all people who are experiencing psychopathic or sociopathic behaviors have some sort of malformation in the orbital cortex. They're like, this is very, very neurological. And some people, when they're talking about the therapeutic process, they actually advise people not to read the neuroscience because, like, it's just going to be confusing. It's just going to kind of go off in any sort of, some sort of far out and kind of put people down, kind of the wild goose chase, and they might not necessarily get the answers that they're looking for. But, I mean, when you hear something like that, that almost all forms of psychopathy and sociopathy deal with a malformation in the orbital cortex, I mean, doesn't that kind of sound like, hey, it seems like there's something causing that stuff? Psychopaths, of course, would be people who are born with that way. They would be born with a particular malformation in the orbital cortex. Once again, though, I would need to do a little bit more reading before I could say that 100%. You're just kind of like hearing some stuff from a few sources, and you get a little bit curious about it, and then you're just like, I really need to kind of get a little bit more of an understanding on all of these things myself, but this is kind of just stuff that people have put out in the literature and in film that we can explore. So what I would say, though, is when we're going to be looking at the concepts of destructive and antisocial behavior that are going to be leading toward, mental awareness issues and chaotic behavior in our societies in the future, I would say, though, that we're probably going to have to really amp up our defenses because over the next 150 to 200 years, we're probably going to be experiencing people who are just going to be showing an entirely new wide range of mental abilities that perhaps we haven't even seen before. And this is going to get a little bit sci-fi here, but there used to be some memes out there, and there might have even been some stuff mentioned on a countdown site or something about how in the year 2040, supposedly we're supposed to be experiencing some new form of hyper-human evolution where people are just going to be blowing some stuff up off the charts in terms of mental ability, in terms of physical ability, and I'm not necessarily sure if that's true. We won't know until 2040 happens, but I'd be quite curious, though, if more people wouldn't be having sort of a brain that's going to be somewhat evolving toward the way that Kim Peek was. I know in our present day and age, the medical science would probably argue that he was an anomaly, but, we're talking about the guy who has, just no hemispheres in his brain, but one single cortex that is kind of just processing everything, increased ability to focus. And I really say that, though, because that's kind of in line with almost what the endpoint of the hunter-farmer hypothesis was supposed to be, in my own limited understanding of it. That, you're gaining the ability to concentrate on multiple things at once. Well, of course, that's what he can do. And imagine if he actually had the ability to function that way with a certain set of social skills. And we're talking about the kind of abilities to process math in an insanely fast way. The ability to remember, like, all the phone books in America and such. I mean, I think that we're probably going to be experiencing a lot more of that in the future. But I definitely think that in our lifetime, once again, that stuff might happen 150, 200 years from now. In our lifetime, we're probably going to be seeing a lot more people who kind of know how to do things like concentrate on multiple things at once. And my father would always get mad at me when he would see me reading a book while I'd be watching television. And it would just sort of be like, he's like, yeah, you can't really learn anything like that. And I was like, well, I'm just kind of doing it anyway. But imagine being able to do that with a little bit more precision. And I think that we're going to definitely see some heightened abilities from people in that particular way. But the problem is, okay, something like Rain Man, something like Kim Peek, real life or fictional, think about someone who would have the ability to kind of use a higher level of conscious thinking for a destructive purpose. I mean, they're just like using their sort of mental and cognitive functions for evil, for destruction, making a more calculated and methodical plan to commit these serial murders so they don't get caught. Oh, we're definitely in line for some very destructive things. And that's one of the reasons why I tie it all into this type of reformulating our educational system, because let's face it, in the United States of America, our educational system sucks. It is almost just kind of like, well, I equate our public schools to prisons a lot of the time. It's like you have no choice. It's compulsory. You have to go there. Try not to get into any fights in the chow hall. You get an hour on the yard outside. Actually, we only had 30 minutes of recess when I was growing up. And even up till junior high and high school or something, we still had 30 minutes post chow hall time. But yeah, like it feels somewhat kind of like almost like a prison system where they have to put all these kids so they don't kind of become more destructive. The point is, though, That is kind of like the median. We need more alternative answers. And I don't really think we're ever going to be escaping these kind of destructive behaviors in society until we have some sort of alternative educational structures in our system that are going to be reaching people in a different way. We're talking about mental awareness classes, mindfulness classes, perhaps meditation classes, and perhaps life coaching in high school or something like that. Or even just like sort of treating the concept of a guidance counselor as like a guidance counselor / life coach or something. I know that might sound silly, but let's face it though. You can turn on the evening news every single night and you're going to see some new tragedy. Our system just is not reaching everybody. And there are definitive ways that we can do things to make improvements. Alright, so that's a little bit of a rant today. I had like 12 cups of coffee. Maybe it was like 6. I didn't count or something, so I was a little hyped up. But that's all for me now, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say. And until next time, if you have anything to say at all, drop a comment below, and until next time.